Tomorrow can be a dangerous word for a writer. Tomorrow I'll find time. Tomorrow I'll finish writing that chapter. Tomorrow I'll put the finishing touches on that story. Procrastination is a demon I'm sure we've all fought with. But like how water douses fire, procrastination's opposite is key to taking it down. And that opposite is dailiness. Dailiness means finding time to write every day. And more importantly, I think, defining what constitutes writing for you, which is important to setting up achievable daily goalposts for yourself. It's only through dailiness that novels and series even get completed. And even if you're a short story writer, you'll be writing story after story, and that demands daily attention. Oh, and let's not just be brutally practical about all this. If writing is fun, that means training yourself in dailiness also means you get to do something fun every day. And it's hard to say no to that. So today we cover strategies to train yourself in daily writing. Welcome back to WordSea, guidance for writers new and veteran. Stephen King's gone on record saying that he writes about 6 pages every day and has a strict writing schedule beginning each day between about 8 o'clock and 8:30. He recommends trying to complete a draft of a book, no matter its size, within about 3 months. King's advice, I think, should be taken on principle, but maybe not in practice. I know it hardly seems like my place to pick a fight with Stephen King, but I really do believe that if the end result of creative endeavors is highly individualized, then its process should be individualized too. How much you write each day should be relative to what you feel like you want to accomplish. Whether you want to shoot for writing 200 or 2,000 words a day, do it. Your goalposts are up to you to determine. What's the most important thing to remember here is that no matter your goals, you write every single day. But we need to define what exactly constitutes writing for you. I always ask my students to figure out if they're more process or product-based writers. What category they fall into will help determine what writing means to them. If you tend to write without a strict plan and are more about stumbling into meaning, exploring your own imagination, then you're probably more of a process-based writer. But if you tend to work off a plan and like to do lots of pre-production before you start writing, then you're more likely a product-based writer. Of course, there's nuance and cross-pollination between the two, but to simplify things, process and product writers approach daily writing differently. For instance, at the end of the day, process-based writers are usually satisfied having explored multiple ideas just a little bit, or having dived into a single scene, chapter, or character for some extended period of time. Nothing has to really begin or end for a process-based writer for them to feel satisfied with writing at the end of the day. So coming to understand, say, a plot point, character, or theme more deeply is usually good enough to call the day a success. Meanwhile, product-based writers often work better with some guide rails. A product-based writer often feels satisfied with a day of writing when a beginning-to-end linearity is completed. Sometimes this means writing several thousand words and knocking out a chapter or two all at once, or even completing an entire story. So find out what sort of writer you are and use that information to guide what kind of goals you should set for yourself. Personally, I'm a process-based writer. I'm happy to write half a conversation in the morning, some character backstory in the afternoon, and then several scenes of a chapter at night. But I've also worked off strict plans sometimes, so that I don't let my thoughts ramble and get away from me. So feel free to dabble in the processes too, because you never know when one process might serve you better than the other. And don't worry if you don't know exactly what kind of writer you are yet. The only way you'll learn is by writing more, and the best way to write more is to write every day. And as you write every day, pay attention to your surroundings. Every writer I've ever met has a specific set of preferable environmental elements around them when they write. So even if you've been writing for some time, try to pay attention to your habits of place, time, environment, and stimuli that help your creativity flow. So, for example, I work best at night, usually between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. I write mostly on a laptop. The room that I'm in needs to be completely dark, and I need music, always. I also enjoy taking brief walks right before and right after my writing. However, throughout the day, sometimes for hours at a time, I'll fiddle with characters or conversations or images or something I may want to edit somewhere down the line, maybe just an idea I had at random that I just jotted down. And then come nighttime, I'll sit down for 3 to 4 hours and then consolidate all those ideas into full prose. So again, I recommend that you do some research. Study when you and your creativity are most in sync. It becomes much easier to write every day and meet those writing goals of yours if you've got a time and place you can sort of draw power from every day. You can sort of think of it almost like coming into work and punching in your time card, although with writing I think it's a little more fun than walking into, a business place and punching in a time card. Because remember, writing doesn't have to be just a series of goalposts to be reached and then passed. It's fun, I'm going to keep harping on that point because, well, I think it's worth harping on about. Because how awesome is it that you could potentially get to spend 2, 3, or 4, or even more hours every day enjoying yourself with your own ideas, expressing yourself creatively. I mean, for real, I've never been more proud as a teacher than when my students who have never written creatively before are all of a sudden in love with, I guess, the euphoria of creation. And I always hope that those students stick with writing, not for my sake, but for theirs. And I hope that you stick with it too, if you're not already enamored with writing. But with dailiness being such an important aspect of writing, there's other fantastic writers with advice to give. Julia Cameron has some choice advice about dailiness in the Right to Rights chapter, fittingly titled Dailiness. She compares daily writing to both physical exercise and, quote, keeping a pot of soup on the back of the stove, unquote. She warns that without dailiness, your writing muscles can feel sluggish or heavy and cold. And I want to read you this quote of Cameron's in its entirety. Quote, writing is the act of motion. Writing is the commitment to move forward, not to stew in our own juices, to become whatever it is we are becoming. Writing is both the boat and the wind in the sails. Even on the days when the winds of inspiration seem slight, there is some forward motion, some progress made. To facilitate dailiness, Cameron recommends a kind of specific journaling. She calls these her evening notes. They help close out a day of writing on an introspective note. She recommends writing a few sentences about the day, things you noticed or things you did, then distilling one single question to pose to yourself just before you sleep. And then come the morning, you can answer that question to jumpstart your writing. Now, Cameron also thinks that we should write in the morning so that we don't put off writing throughout the day, but if you're a night writer like me, then turn this strategy into maybe something called morning notes. And you can think of the notes as a little burst of heat to keep your soup warm, I guess. Roy Peter Clark, meanwhile, doesn't explicitly mention dailiness in his book Writing Tools, but there's a couple chapters that I think offer some fine soup warmers. In his chapter Read for Form and Content, he recommends reading material that pertains to your current writing project. Clark recommends nonfiction sources. So, if you're writing, say, a fantasy novel set in the medieval Ottoman Empire, you might read works on the region's history or culture or art or architecture or food. Clark recommends reading several of these works, not necessarily all the way through, and then marking passages that inspire you and enrich your ideas. When we eventually come to the lesson on world building, we'll come back to this idea of Clark's. In a similar vein, Clark also recommends that we save string. Clark defines saving string as accumulating materials, which can be either research or bits of conversations or parts of books in progress. He writes, quote, save string, gather piles of research, be attentive to when it's time to write earlier than you think you can. Let those early drafts drive you to additional research and organization. Now remember what we discussed in our earlier lesson about the inner critic. Early drafts don't have to be perfect, they just need to exist. Once your ideas are on paper, you can start looking back and researching more or finding bits of string to save. Clark goes on to say, quote, this process may appear too long and unproductive with too much saving, storing, and thinking. The trick for me is to grow several crops at the same time, fertilize one crop even as you harvest another, unquote. Remember here too from our previous lesson on writer's block, saving string is a great way for you to always have something engaging to write about, which means you'll have something to write every day. Much of the ritual of dailiness is interconnected, like a huge machine, to elements of having to deal with writer's block, having to silence your inner critic, moving past the anxiety of the blank page. So each little gear in the writing machine needs to be greased and maintained, but when the whole machine's in good working order, it practically runs itself. As a personal aside to Clark talking about saving string, as much as this is a series about writing prose, I'm of the opinion that inspirational writing, or little bits of string, can be saved from anywhere. So films, television, tabloids, video games, stage plays, don't feel limited to one source of inspiration because it's not what you're writing at the moment. We book people don't interact nearly enough with the film or video game or drama people, so don't be afraid to cross borders. The beloved classic Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory was directed by the late Mel Stewart, who was more known for filming documentaries than for feature-length films, but the unique documentary-esque elements in the film's first half are clearly inspired by Stewart's documentary background, so feel free to be a creative cannibal, taking little bits of nutrients from all kinds of writing. When all is said and done, there's a real hard work ethic involved in successfully pulling off dailiness in writing. But there's also a real hard play ethic in it as well. If you're writing every day, you're giving yourself more room to play and explore and enjoy the act of creative expression. Whether you're trying to write a whole book in 3 months, like Stephen King says, or if you're content to just save string, write evening notes, and keep your soup warm, dailiness is sort of like the spine that props up every writer. No matter its shape, or no matter its structure or its stability, it's what's holding up the writer. It's what makes them into, well, a writer, and not just someone who has ideas they'd like to write about. And that's going to close out this lesson. Next lesson, we'll discuss how to seek out feedback, how to find writing allies, and what exactly the gift community is. I wish you all the best as you navigate the wide open WordSea and experience the wonder of writing. See you next time.